Welcome back to Tap Out MMA Talk, y'all. My name is Cooper Burke, and I'm here to take you through the best of MMA yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Through the thousands and thousands of fights in the history of the sport, a select few have wound up as wars from start to finish. Athletes walk into the cage prepared to leave it on the line every fight, and in these bouts, they truly did stand their ground in the octagon. They fought like their opponent was trying to take food off their plate and refused to back down. These 10 bouts are ingrained in the history of the sport. Almost every one of them has had a huge ripple effect across the mixed martial arts world and has changed the trajectories of fighters everywhere. Without further ado, here are the top 10 greatest fights in mixed martial arts history. Buckle up, it's about to get fun. Great. Robbie Lawler beat Carlos Condit. It's no surprise ruthless Robbie Lawler appears on this list a few times. The then 33-year-old had won 4 in a row before this, including a rematch against Johnny Hendricks by split decision. The former Strikeforce veteran won the belt just over a year before and stepped in to face Carlos Condit. Condit is regarded as one of the greatest fighters to never win a title. Robbie Lawler is a big reason why. Condit sat at 38-0, and he was just 2 fights shy of 40 at age 33, something that's truly mind-boggling. Condit was 2-3 in his last 5 fights, but his losses were to Tyron Woodley, George St. Pierre, and Johnny Hendricks. He did beat Thiago Alves by way of stoppage to set up the title shot. Once this one got underway, both fighters realized they had a scrap in their hands. Condit started off the first strong, dropping Lawler with a straight right. In true Lawler fashion, he got up and gave an unhinged smile. Through the rest of the round, Condit controlled the momentum with a few hard shots. Rounds 2 and 3 are more of the same, with both Condit and Lawler leveling huge shots. Round 4 goes to Condit. He dropped Lawler with a leg kick, and then tagged Lawler with a knee up the middle. From there, having disrupted Lawler's momentum, he landed huge straight punches and a right body kick that stung Lawler in the closing seconds of the round. Here's where the magic happens. It's round 5, and it's 2-2 on the judges' scorecards, although one had Condit winning round 3. Rarely is a fight tied 2-2 going into the 5th round. Condit started strong with leg kicks and front kicks to keep Lawler at range, but Lawler charged forward, landing a huge left and then a succession of punches near the cage. Lawler wobbled Condit, and they squared off in the center of the octagon. In the final moments, Lawler smiled, and they rocked Condit one more time. Eventually, the judges gave the fight to Lawler by way of split decision, 48-47, 48-47, 47-48. This fight was huge for the division, as Dana White thought that Condit won the fight. It marked the peak of Robbie Lawler's reign at 170 pounds, and was significant for how active the two athletes were in this fight. Now that we have number 10 down, it's time to move on up the list. At number 9, we've got a lightweight classic in Poirier v. Hooker, one of the best fights in the last couple of years. Poirier came into the fight 25-6-0. He was coming off a title shot where Khabib Nurmagomedov submitted him in the 3rd round. For Hooker, he's an even 3-3 in his last 6 since his fight in 2020, while Poirier is 3-2 in his last 5 since that fight. If there's one thing about the two of them, it's they will go bell to bell in any fight they'll in. Let's look at Hooker's Jalen Turner fight and Poirier's Jim Miller fight. There wasn't any bad blood between the two of them, but they came out swinging early and often. They traded blow for blow the entire first round, as Dan Hooker came up with a flurry of leg kicks and stuck Poirier over the eye. They then went after each other towards the end of the round. Hooker and Poirier went after it again, with Poirier walking Hooker down, and Hooker responded, wobbling Poirier. For the rest of the round, they continued to fire back and forth, with Hooker landing a huge knee up the middle to close the round. More of the same continued in the 3rd. They traded for a while, but Hooker got rocked, so he shot for a takedown, while Poirier found a guillotine that only got tighter and tighter. Somehow, Hooker was able to escape. Poirier finished the round with a huge elbow and a few big shots, and now Dan Hooker wound up on the scorecards 2-1. Poirier completely turned the tides after this fight. Poirier hit a huge 4th with a big takedown and several choke attempts. He transitioned to an omoplata, but Hooker was able to evade it. There was so much blood coming down during the guillotine that Hooker just slid out, a testament to how incredible that fight was. The 5th round was all Dustin, as he looked like he knocked down Hooker. Hooker shot off a few takedowns, and Poirier stuffed them and tried to set up a submission. At the very end of the fight, Poirier took Hooker's back and controlled it from there. This is one of my personal favorites because both of these men are extremely game and will fight anyone anywhere. They will go to any lengths to win a fight. After the bout, the two showed mutual respect for the display they put on, as they both had one fight of the night. Let's roll on to number 8, Duho Choi versus Cub Swanson. Here's one of the whole crew's favorites. Shout out to Annie for suggesting this. Cub Swanson has been and always will be an absolute stud and fan favorite. He is, along with Uriah Faber, one of the prodigal sons of SoCal, and he makes it known. This fight was so much fun that it landed in the UFC's Hall of Fame, rightfully so. Swanson came into the fight 23-7-0 and was actually an underdog going into it. His opponent, Duho Choi, was one of the most highly regarded prospects in the entire UFC at the time. He rocked a near perfect record of 14-1. He had just finished Thiago Tavares in the first round of The Ultimate Fighter and was generating huge buzz at only 26 years old. Choi only had one loss on his record, and it looked like the sky was the limit for the Korean Superboy. However, Cub Swanson got in the way. Round 1 started off as a bang as Choi landed a big right hand and then tried to transition to a trip after throwing several knees. He then grabbed a clinch and used it to land a huge knee. Swanson responded with a right hand stunning Choi, as Swanson used slips to create awkward movement to connect with Choi and provide a dichotomy to Choi's tight style. After about 2 minutes, Swanson hits Choi again, but Choi grabs a clinch and they trade knees. They break to exchange heavy right hands until the end of the round, and Choi emerges victorious from the scorecards. Round 2 began with Choi being as aggressive as ever. He's throwing wildly, with one landing and causing Choi to grab a clinch. Choi stuck Swanson with a jab, but he responded with a huge left hook and a body kick. Swanson continued the flurry and landed a huge leg kick to stun Choi and go in for the kill. However, it was far from over. As Swanson swung wildly to try and put Choi away, Choi trapped Swanson on the counter. The two trade haymakers like there's no tomorrow. Choi manages to tag Swanson with a huge shot that causes him to cover up. Swanson manages to grab a clinch, and he somehow manages to bring Choi to the ground. Swanson was throwing everything he had on the ground and pound, left Choi up. After landing a big right hook, Swanson pulled out the cartwheel kick and it landed flush. He tagged Choi with another right and then began to wobble as Swanson landed a huge spinning back fist. They went to a clinch and then broke as the round ended. After that, it was tied 1-1 on the scorecards. The best thing about this fight is the dichotomy of styles. Choi is so technical and precise. Joe Rogan described him as having piston-like precision, while Swanson kept his hands low and swung hard in pursuit of a finish. It all added up to one of the greatest scraps in the history of the sport. Sold-out crowd was on their feet in Toronto, and 5 minutes separated the two men from immortality. Early on, Swanson kept going to the body kick right-hand combination, a testament to his versatility. Choi and Swanson traded again, but Choi came out on the right side as he stuck Swanson again and aimed for a takedown. Swanson reverses it and they get up. Right after Choi lands an ankle pick, as they got up, Swanson and Choi both tagged each other, and both seemed to be near the point of exhaustion. With less than a minute to go, Swanson hit Choi with a Superman punch, but he puts Choi down with a back fist with a few seconds to go, winning him the entire fight. He finished on top, raining heavy shots, and the announcers couldn't believe what they were seeing. I couldn't either. Regardless, Swanson goes on to win 30-27 times 2, 29-28 in one of the greatest fights of all time, and one that altered the careers of both men, for better or for worse. Now we're going to take it a little farther back to 2011, when two legends of the sport, both inside and outside the UFC, left it all out there. Number 7, Dan Henderson versus Shogun Rua. I was way too young to have seen this live, but on the rewatch, it's easy to see how this fight has been enshrined in MMA history. After fighting in Pride, coming back to the UFC to unify the middleweight titles, going to Strikeforce, and even coming back to the UFC again, it was safe to say that Dan Henderson had been everywhere. He won the Pride title, the Ultimate Fighter, the middleweight tournament at UFC 17, and many more accolades. Hendo was coming off a first-round finish of one of the greatest fighters of all time in Strikeforce, and Shogun Rua was his welcome back party in the UFC. Rua won the UFC light heavyweight title after avenging a loss to Lyoto Machida by first-round finish. John Jones beat him to begin his reign at the title, and he most recently finished former champion Forrest Griffin heading into this. At this point in their careers, both men were already legends. However, they furthered their status at the upper echelon of the combat sports world with this barn burner. Round one began with Hua starting off aggressively with a takedown. Henderson stopped it and almost submits him. He then starts to tee off, but Hua survives, and they end up getting up. Henderson dropped him, but as Hua gets back into the clinch, they break, and Hua's face is all bloody. Hua dropped Henderson with a massive right hook. Henderson barely gets back to his feet as they finish in the clinch. Round number two began with Rua trying a shot on the break, leaving himself open as Henderson caught him with an uppercut and then let rip a bunch of punches to try and put the fight away. After about a minute, they break up the clinch and Hua tags Henderson, with Henderson returning with a head and body combination. As the third round got going, the ref told him it was the last round. Henderson set the record straight. Henderson came out from a takedown attempt and then landed one of his patented overhands, flooring Hua. Later on, Henderson stuffed the takedown and landed elbows until Hua stuck it and landed a few punches. The round ended with both on the fence. In round four, tide starts to turn. Both men trade shots and are near the point of exhaustion. Henderson barely stumbling back to his corner. And round five saw history being made. After Henderson tried to get to the clinch, Shogun took him down and landed a few shots, and they grappled for a while until Henderson gave up his back. After Henderson gave up mounting it, Hua punched him twice in the back of the head and got warned by the ref. Hua landed shot after shot, trying to put Henderson away, but both men are exhausted. As such, the fight goes to the final bell and becomes the first non-UFC title fight to go 5 rounds. Even though this fight was razor close due to a few 10-8s, Henderson walked away victorious 48-47 times 3. Number 6 is one that all MMA fans know about, regardless of how long they've been watching the sport. Fry vs. Takiyama is one of the most insane fights in the history of the sport, and it happened a year and a half before I was even born. Again, this is why my opinions are subjective. Don Fry was regarded as one of the toughest fighters to ever grace the planet, as he squared off against Yoshihiro Takahama in Pride FC. Pride had 3 rounds. The first was 10 minutes, and the last 2 were 5 minutes. As if the men had some sort of agreement, they grabbed collar ties early in the first and started hitting each other for what seemed like forever. They took time to clinch and catch their breath, but they never stopped punching each other. At one point, Fry successfully took Takayama down to the mat and began to rain shot after shot down. Unfortunately for Takayama, this was the end of the road for him, as the ref waved off the fight as Takayama had already gained 2 black eyes and severe facial swelling. After the fight, the 2 men embraced, and Fry had nothing but good things to say about Takayama. The bout itself was crazy, but Fry told Takayama and the crowd arigato, and that he was grateful for the opportunity. Here's another reason why this is one of my favorite fights of all time. Don Fry had the wherewithal and grace to send him a message after an accident left Takayama paralyzed. Takayama-san, he said, God gave me the greatest opponent anybody could ever ask for, you. You made the greatest fight the world has ever seen. You are the reason that our fight beat the World Cup of Soccer head-to-head on TV. You are the image of Bushido and strength and triumph. You are the first person everyone asks about when they meet. You are the warrior we all look to be, Fry said. This sport is better off with this fight ending, I'm sure. The mutual respect showed between the two is something that every athlete in every sport needs, regardless of what competition they're in. Now we're getting somewhere. Number 5 is an all-time classic. Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero. Even though this is supposed to be a title fight, Romero missed weight, and so Whittaker could only lose the title. Regardless, it was still an absolute classic. Whittaker came into the fight off a unanimous decision win, and this bout proved to be the final one in his title reign. As for Romero, he would have one more title shot in the UFC, and that resulted in one of the worst fights of all time. This fight is special as it showcased 2 stalwarts at the peak of their powers. Whittaker came out early with teep kicks and oblique stomps, trying to gauge the range of Romero. Romero, like always, waited to try and counter with huge power punches. 10-9 Whittaker. In the second round, Whittaker continued to chop at Romero's legs. At one point, Romero went for a spinning back fist, but Whittaker popped him with a stiff jab. For the rest of the round, Whittaker stuck Romero with jabs and kicks, as Romero refused to move. Round three started completely differently. Romero knocked down Whittaker with a huge jab, and eventually corralled him by the fence. He landed some big elbows and punches, but Whittaker survived. He landed a big knee in the clinch, and Romero weathered it, tried to walk him down. Whittaker caught him with a head kick, and they clinched to end the round. Round four saw Whittaker crush Romero with body kicks, and one clipped Romero in the cup. For the last 2 minutes, though, all hell broke loose, until Romero wobbled Whittaker, and the round ended with Romero sticking Whittaker once again. Round five was the penultimate decider, and Whittaker got tagged with a stiff 1-2, but he responded well. However, Whittaker got floored by yet another Romero left hand, and Romero emptied the tank to try and finish the fight. Whittaker did try for a takedown, and eventually got to recover from the takedown. However, the final bell rang, and both men had just participated in one of the greatest fights of all time. We're getting closer to our countdown ending, but not before we have some truly amazing fights in store. Up next, we've got another recent classic, Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum. It's hard to believe that this fight was 5 years ago. This is the last time Gastelum challenged for a title, and it represented the beginning of Adesanya's reign in the top middleweight division. Gastelum started very strong with a few body kicks, but Adesanya responded with a sharp body kick and a jab. He dropped Adesanya with a huge right, but Adesanya got up and tagged him with another right. Adesanya used his movement and timing to disrupt Gastelum in round two. Adesanya then returned with a huge head kick and dropped Gastelum with a hard straight right. Later in the round, he threw a spinning elbow and dropped Gastelum again. That round was a masterclass from Adesanya, using his head movement, his lateral movement to confuse Gastelum and set up his offense. Round four got real. Gastelum caught Adesanya with a right hook as they circled out of the clinch, and Adesanya landed a nasty jab. They traded fire for a few more exchanges, and after Adesanya threw a low kick, Gastelum wobbled Adesanya with a high kick. For whatever reason, Gastelum shot, and Adesanya stuffed it and returned fire with a high kick. Many people who saw the fight live thought Gastelum could have won the fight and tried to finish Adesanya had he not shot for a takedown, and many consider it to be one of the biggest mistakes in the history of the sport. Round five was tied, and this is where we saw Adesanya come into his own. About halfway through, Adesanya ran into straight right and a big hook, wobbling Gastelum, and then followed it up with another straight right and a body kick. He dropped Gastelum to the mat, and Gastelum tried to get up and landed a double leg. Adesanya dropped him again with another combination. Gastelum barely hung on to the bell. As such, Adesanya walked away with a unanimous decision win. This fight was probably one of the best performances Adesanya ever put on, and it resulted in one of the best fights ever. Number three is one that isn't without controversy, and is one of my personal all-time favorites. Jones vs. Gustafsson 1 was one of the most technical and back-and-forth fights of all time. As much as it was a battle of wills, it was a battle of wits. Gustafsson cut Jones up early, but Jones countered with several well-placed jabs. Somehow, Jones continued to land spinning kicks. This wasn't enough to control the momentum, and Gustafsson took him down. After they got up, Jones poked Gustafsson in the eye at the very end of the round, and they went to the corners. Gustafsson learned pretty early on how to stop Jones's spinning kicks, and so he used a lot of lateral movement to cut down on Jones's spinning. However, Jones caught him with a head kick, but Gustafsson returned fire and managed to get him right-handed at the end. Scorecards were even 3-1, and the fun was just beginning. Round three was one of the best, as Gustafsson was lethal with his right hand. Jones was able to connect with leg kicks. Gustafsson was able to control the movement, but Jones's long legs played a huge role, as he was able to get counter kicks in. Towards the end, Gustafsson dropped a great 1-2 combo with an elbow at the end, and John Jones elbowed him in the neck to end the round. Jones got hot in round four, but of course, he had to be warned twice to watch his fingers in this round after the eye poke earlier. Throughout the round, Gustafsson had Jones' number early on, but McCarthy had to warn Jones a total of 4 times to watch his fingers. The turning point came very late in the round, as John Jones landed a perfect spinning elbow to stun Gustafsson and steal the round. In round 5, Jones stuffed Gustafsson's takedowns multiple times, but Gustafsson landed an elbow or two. However, the challenger faded fast, and Jones took advantage, scoring several elbows and a takedown. What won him the fight, though, was the sequence where he slipped an uppercut and hit Gustafsson with an elbow. The margins were so thin that many people argue over the result to this day, and that's why it's such a great fight. Almost there to the top of our list. Number two, it's even better. Rory McDonald and Robbie Lawler the second. This is one of the most violent fights of all time, and the only reason it's not number one on this list is the first fight had such an undeniable cultural impact. This fight, McDonald versus Lawler, was so violent that it irreparably altered the career of Rory McDonald, and it vaulted both men to the UFC Hall of Fame. Round one came and went with McDonald breaking off jabs and kicks, and Lawler caught McDonald after he stuffed a takedown with a huge knee. Round two was all Lawler again, as he managed to land several right hook, left straight combinations throughout the round. McDonald did manage to stick Lawler with a few jabs, but Lawler beat him up pretty bad. In round three, Lawler rocked McDonald early, and he cut him open. However, about halfway through, McDonald threw a high kick that Lawler barely blocked, and it hurt the champion back. McDonald unloaded, and Lawler barely made it till the end of the round. McDonald came out hot, landing huge knees and uppercuts, but Lawler somehow survived. However, it was McDonald's show through this point, as he managed to land longer strikes and bloody the face of his opponent. This is why we have one of the greatest photos in combat sports of all time. As they go to their corners, Lawler spits blood in the octagon and stares at McDonald after the bell sounds. And they move on to the fifth. The tables have turned. Lawler walks McDonald down, jabbing him again and again. He finally dropped McDonald with a straight and landed a few more shots, but it was pretty much over from there. In the blink of an eye, Lawler turned the tables and cemented his place in history. Like I said, this fight is essentially what sealed Robbie Lawler's career as a UFC legend. If Rory McDonald and him had not participated in one of the greatest fights of all time, we probably wouldn't still be talking about Lawler's success today. Number one on our list is one that you all know and can guess. Bonner versus Griffin. This is the fight that was so good it saved mixed martial arts. This bout was the finale of The Ultimate Fighter, and it was airing on Spike TV. However, about halfway through, I'm not going to expound too much on the play-by-play because this is just a fight you have to watch for yourself. It was all Bonner for about the first half of the bout, and he cut Griffin so bad the fight got stopped. Once Herb Dean and the cut man cleaned him up, he gave Griffin a second wind, and Bonner pushed the pace too hard and gassed out. Griffin turned the tide, and in the third round, he laid it all on the line. Because there wasn't a finish, there was supposed to be an overtime round for the contract. However, Bruce Buffer announced there would be no overtime, and Forrest Griffin, former Athens, Georgia resident, won 29-28 on all scorecards. Both men saved the sport, and for Stephen Bonner, this was his legacy in the sport. Although he's no longer with us, he saved the sport we all know and love. I hope you all enjoyed my run through the best 10 fights of all time. You'll want to watch every single one of them from start to finish. It gives you a new appreciation for the quality and talent of these athletes that you can't get anywhere else. As always, stay on the train, the scenery will change, and go dogs.